What's up, guys? Peter Valley, FBAmastery.com here. Look, in this video, what I'm going to set out to do is definitively settle all questions related to acceptable condition when it comes to books. Tons of confusion around the subject. People don't know when can you list a book as acceptable, when should you not. I'm going to cover everything. Part one, I'm going to tell you what acceptable condition is. We're going to define it. I'm going to give you Amazon's definition. Then I'm going to give you my definition, which is very, very different. Number two, we're going to cover the top 3 mistakes I see Amazon sellers make when it comes to acceptable condition. Number 3, what makes a book acceptable? What are the specific list of damages that a book can incur that bumps it down to acceptable? I'm going to get really specific. And then in part 4, I'm going to hold 3 damaged books up to the camera. I got them right here. And I'm going to ask the question, would you list this as good or acceptable? I'm going to tell you what I would do, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. And I'm going to drink a lot of coffee and just generally be obnoxious. Okay, sound good? Okay, so what is acceptable condition? Acceptable condition, as we all probably know, the worst condition on Amazon. It's the bottom of the barrel. There's no condition worse than acceptable. And what I see a lot of sellers do is get this completely wrong in both directions. On one hand, you got this weird paranoia where a lot of sellers are like afraid to list a book as acceptable because they got some idea that like it's like they're gonna get caught or like they're getting away with something. When acceptable condition is it's a totally legitimate condition category. That's why Amazon created it. On the other end of the spectrum, you get a lot of sellers who think acceptable is just the dumping ground for any single book that doesn't qualify as good. So they just list a lot of things acceptable they probably shouldn't list at all. I'm going to cover that. And let's get this out of the way really quick. My name is Peter Valley. I've been selling on Amazon for over 15 years at this point. I do the website FBAmastery.com. I think most Amazon sellers are wrong about most things, which is what prompted me to make this video about acceptable condition because lots of people get it wrong. And I got to say, subscribe, like the video, head to FBAmastery.com, get all the free stuff you see here. Link below this video. If you do not subscribe and like this video, I will come to your house personally and rearrange your furniture. I've got warrants out in multiple states because there are certain people who have not heeded this warning. I will come to your house and rearrange your furniture. Do it right now. And lastly, there's a much more extensive version of this article if you go to FBAmastery.com. I couldn't fit everything in this video. A little more detail in the article version. Hit the link below this video to head to that article. Okay, so we can't really tackle the subject of when to apply acceptable condition and when not to apply it. We can't really understand it unless we first understand Amazon's definition. So I pulled this right off Amazon's website and I'll read it to you. If you can, right there at the top, if you can see it. Used acceptable condition. This is specific to books, by the way. All pages in the cover are intact, but the shrink wrap, dust covers, or box set case may be missing. Pages may include limited notes, highlighting, or minor water damage, but the text is readable. Item may but the dust. This is Amazon's typo, not mine. Item may but the dust cover may be missing. Good job, Amazon. Pages may include limited notes and highlighting, but the text cannot be obscured or unreadable. That's Amazon's definition. Okay, let's dissect this. What did we just learn? So, number 1. Dust jacket. If a book does not have a dust jacket, it must be considered acceptable condition in the eyes of Amazon. Side note, I completely disagree with this, and I break this rule almost every day, so we'll get back to that in a second. It's just what Amazon says. The second thing we just learned from Amazon's definition of acceptable is that if you've got a box set of books and there's no case, you can actually list that as acceptable. It's okay to list a box set without the actual slipcover. Now, this isn't exactly a common scenario, so we don't really need to spend much time on this, but it's good to know. Number 3 thing we just learned, if a book has, quote, limited notes, Amazon's words there, then a book must be listed as acceptable condition. What does this mean? Well, I don't know. Does it mean if it has any writing, it must be acceptable? What does it mean? Personally, I interpret this to mean if it's got writing on the interior of the book that's not on the title page, not a gift inscription, not a name inscription, beyond a small number of pages, we probably should be listing that book as acceptable condition. 1 or 2 or 5 pages, I'm probably going to list it as good. Amazon's a little ambiguous here, so we got to read between the lines. That's how I interpret it. Number 4, a book with any highlighting at all must be considered acceptable condition. I'm going to spend more on this in a second, but I bend this rule all the time. If it's a textbook, I think a certain amount of highlighting is totally acceptable, no pun intended. And I don't have to list it as acceptable. I'll list it as good. If it's not a textbook and has any highlighting at all, I'm probably going to list it as acceptable condition. Okay, so next thing we learned is minor water damage definitely always means acceptable in the eyes of Amazon. I totally agree with this one. Absolutely. If a book's got water damage, I'm not cutting corners here. It goes instantly to acceptable condition status. That one's pretty straightforward. So as you can see, Amazon's definition is a little bit messy. So we are left to interpret a lot. There's a little bit of ambiguity here. So I'm going to give you what I consider to be the unifying theory, the string theory of acceptable condition. This distills down everything that I believe about acceptable condition into one sentence, and I'm going to give that to you here on the next slide. And I think this is important. I spent a lot of time thinking about this because every time you pick up a book, you don't want to be like, like the checklist of like water damage and highlighting and and like comparing it. You don't want to be thinking about that. It's just too much time, right? None of us have time for that. So we just need one sentence to put a bow on it. So we always know, is this book acceptable or is it not? I'm going to give you what I've spent a lot of time refining down to one sentence. Here it is. Drum roll. This is it. Acceptable condition is any book that is too damaged to qualify for other conditions, yet is not so damaged it's going to make your customer mad. This is not Amazon. This is me. I wrote this. Okay. This is my unifying theory of acceptable condition. Okay. So anytime I got a book and I'm on the fence about it, I just read this line to myself in my head. I go, does the damage definitely 100% with no ambiguity rule out any other condition? So it's got to be acceptable. And then if a customer pulled this out of the envelope, would they be upset? Would this make them mad? Is it so damaged anyone who bought this book, even acceptable condition, would be mad? Okay. This eliminates most of your risk. So here's a test. Kind of put it another way. Here's a test. If I'm ever uncertain about a book and whether or not it's acceptable condition, I will ask this question. If I was a customer, put myself in the customer's shoes here, and I ordered this book in acceptable condition, knowing it's acceptable, and I got this book in the mail, the book I'm about to list for sale, would I be mad? This has saved me countless times. Because a lot of times you're like, well, this book's technically acceptable. Like it's got water damage, not like too bad. But when you look at it through the lens of a customer, you're like, oh yeah, actually, if I was a customer, I'd be really bummed if I got this. Like, I'm not going to list this for sale. And it saved me a bunch of times, probably saved me from a ton of bad feedback. For all I know, it's to save my Amazon account, period. Now, this is probably the part you've all been waiting for, where I get really, really specific, and I'm going to give you my list. It's battle tested over years and years of selling on Amazon of blemishes that definitely bump a book down to acceptable condition. So I know exactly, like, hey, it's got this blemish, definitely acceptable, moving on. Okay, so number one, highlighting on more than 20 or 30 pages if it's a textbook. If it's not a textbook and it's got pretty much any amount of highlighting, maybe like one page is okay. But if it's not a textbook, it's got any amount of highlighting, I'm probably going to list as acceptable condition. And I'm really not, if you notice so far, like I don't mind bending rules. Like I'm not exactly conservative when it comes to this stuff. But I think a customer would be bummed if it got a book, had highlighting, and it wasn't a textbook. Now, textbooks are a totally different ballgame. You're listing a textbook for sale, and it's got some amount of highlighting. I am completely fine listing one of those books as good condition. I think textbook buyers generally understand that highlighting is kind of part of the game. It doesn't necessarily mean it's something they're like expecting, but they're more permissive when it comes to highlighting if you're a student buying a textbook. So if it's a textbook, 20 or 30 pages, beyond that, it's going to be acceptable. I'd say like under 30 or 20 pages, I'm going to go ahead and list that as good. And I've never gotten any negative feedback for that. Next up, heavy pen marks throughout the book. Just bottom line, if it's got like a bunch of writing in it, like more than a couple pages, definitely going to be acceptable condition. No uncertainty there, no hesitation. That's what I'm going to do. Heavy pen marks on the cover. A lot of times you get a book, there's no blemishes inside, but there's blemishes on the outside, on the cover. Now, this is a little bit weird because sometimes there'll be like a little bit of, like some amount of pen mark is totally fine. Like you just see someone like writes their name or something. I'm not going to list that book as acceptable, but not too often, but often enough that I've got a mental note in my head. If there's a lot of pen writing on the cover, like someone just like writes their name really big with like a Sharpie, or just lots and lots of pen marks on the cover. Sometimes you see this with like grade school textbooks, like not college ones, but like grade school, where like students will just sit there and like, you know, carve their name in 50 times, or like I love Lisa or whatever, like the girl at the next desk. You'll just see lots of weird stuff. Yeah, I'm probably gonna list that as acceptable. Next up, heavy wear. Heavy wear. I think a lot of people grade too conservatively. It takes a significant amount of wear for me to list a book as acceptable condition. Next up, water damage. Minor water damage will bump a book down to acceptable condition. Not heavy water damage. Water damage is a hard pass. I'll get to that in a second. Minor water damage, this is straight out of Amazon's definition. Totally agree with them on this. A little bit of water damage is okay, but just a little bit. Next up, a badly torn cover. Now, if a book has like a major tear through it, oftentimes, not very often, but sometimes I'll try to tape it up. But anything more than like, I don't know, like inch and a half or so, I'm probably going to bump that down to acceptable condition. Okay, next up, damage that is too bad even for acceptable condition. These are books you should never sell if any of these blemishes apply to them. Number one, heavy water damage. As I said, hard pass every time. Every customer would be bummed if they got a book in the mail that had heavy water damage. Number two, heavy pen markings obscuring key parts of the content. This is also right out of Amazon's language and their definition. If it's obscure, covering up the content in any way, beyond just a little bit, which is somewhat subjective, maybe like a page or two, but we're talking about multiple pages where the pen marks actually cover up the text. I'm just not going to list that book for sale at all. And by the way, you guys, you should know this by now if you watch any of my videos or read my stuff on FBA Mastery. Like I'm all down with bending rules. Like I am not conservative when it comes to this stuff at all. I'm just trying to think of like, how do I avoid bad feedback? How do I deliver maximum value to the customer and not leave them feeling deceived in any way? And so that's how I've come to this. So some of you might just be like, hey, like if the book's got writing on 10 pages, like what's the big deal? Yeah, but I think most customers would be bummed. And so I would just prefer not to do that. But some of you may disagree here. But I think I'm a little bit more on the liberal end as far as like what I will sell. So cover that. Yeah. So I see it says on the screen here, 10% of the content. You know, it depends how long the book is. If a book's 600 pages, then 60 pages of writing, that's a little bit much. So it really depends. Broken binding, hard pass. If a book is like about ready to fall apart, of course the customer is going to be upset. So just don't send them that book. Won't list it for sale. Goes right in the trash heap. And by trash heap, I mean the local free library. They've got like a little stand with like where people leave their books. I take all my excess Amazon books there I can't sell and put them in the free library. Lastly, a book with a missing cover. Just don't sell it. Not worth it. Okay, so here's a fun one. Here are condition blemishes that I think most sellers would actually list in acceptable condition. I'll list these as good. Okay, so you might have a little aha moment here where you're like, wow, I've been leaving some money on the table because I've been listing books that have these blemishes as acceptable when you can get away with listing them as good. I'm a good guinea pig. I'm a good canary in the coal mine. What I'm about to explain here, I've done I'm at least hundreds for every single one here, if not thousands of times, and never gotten bad feedback. So not for these. So I'm a pretty good test case. So that's a pretty solid list in my opinion. So missing dust jacket. Never gotten bad feedback for this. Possibly the most controversial one I'm gonna lay out for you here. Anytime a book has a missing dust jacket, I will still list it in good condition, even though Amazon's rules specifically call for any book without a dust jacket to be acceptable only. I shamelessly, without any regret or remorse, list books without dust jackets in good condition, assuming there's no other major damage. If that's the only blemish, that it just doesn't have a dust jacket, good condition every time. Never gotten bad feedback for it. Go ahead and call Amazon and snitch on me. I don't care. I'm completely comfortable with my decision on this. And again, how often does it happen? You got a book without a dust jacket all the freaking time, right? So this will actually make you a lot of money because we're not really covering this here, but acceptable condition books do not sell as quickly as good condition books. So if you take a book and you're like, it could be good, it could be acceptable. If you list it as acceptable, you're leaving money on the table. It's not going to sell as fast or it's not going to sell for as much. I'm not saying customers don't buy acceptable condition. They absolutely do, and they actually do more than you would think. But you're still leaving money on the table because, again, a book in good condition is going to sell quicker, possibly for more. Next up, pen markings on only a few pages. Only a few. If a book has some pen marks and it's just a few pages, I will list that as good condition, but it's got to be just a few. If we're talking about more than like 3-ish, I'm probably going to list it as acceptable. So it's got to be a really small amount of pen marks for me to still make the cut, for me to list as good, but I will do it. Next up, highlighting on less than 20 or 30-ish pages is a little bit subjective. A little bit kind of comes down to like how long the book is. But a small percentage of the book has highlighting. I will list it as good condition if it's a textbook. I said this a second ago. If it's not a textbook and it has any amount of highlighting, except for maybe like half a page or something, I'll list it as acceptable every time. Textbooks are different. Already covered that. Just want to put a finer point on it. Light markings on the cover, again, covered this, but it's like, if it's got a little bit of like some amount of pen marks, that's cool. Heavy pen marks, it's going to be acceptable, but otherwise it'll be good. And any general wear, unless it's really severe, it's going to be good condition. I think a lot of sellers err on the side of being too conservative when it comes to this. They think like a book that just has like moderate wear needs to be acceptable. Look, customers understand. They're not stupid, right? Amazon customers are not stupid. They know if they order a book, used book, it's going to come in used condition. And so you can have a pretty serious amount of wear and not upset any customers if you list it as good condition. It's got to have pretty serious, and I'll show you an example here in a second. I got it right here. An example of a book that does have a heavy enough wear. I will list it as acceptable, but it's got to be pretty bad for me to list a book as acceptable condition. If that's the only blemish at all, it's just purely cover wear. It's got to be pretty serious. Okay, 3 mistakes before we get to the examples I'm going to show you here of like real books in real time that I'm going to hold up to the test of, is this good or acceptable? 3 mistakes I see Amazon sellers make when it comes to acceptable condition. Number 1, crazed paranoia. I covered this a second ago. Paranoia that like somehow listing a book as in acceptable condition is like a crime they're getting away with, or like they're going to get caught by Amazon. Acceptable condition exists for a reason. It is a legitimate condition strata. Totally legitimate. Amazon wouldn't have created it if it wasn't legitimate. So you don't need to feel guilt. You don't need to feel paranoia. You don't need to feel like you're going to get in trouble if you list a book as acceptable. Just don't screw it up. Just follow the guidelines I outlined here. Don't make any customers angry with you. And it's fine. You're allowed to sell like seriously damaged books on Amazon. That's what acceptable condition is for. So don't fall victim to the crazed paranoia. Number two, the other end of the spectrum, thinking that acceptable condition is the dumping ground for every book that doesn't qualify as good. There's lots of books you should not be selling at all on Amazon, okay? So again, we cover the list. Heavy water damage, right? Missing cover, all that stuff. Lots of books are too destroyed for you to even consider selling them on Amazon, okay? So it's not just a landfill where you're like, oh, this book's like, had a landmine blown up under it, and it was set on fire, and it was spit on by 1,000 donkeys, and so therefore it's acceptable. No, you shouldn't list that book for sale. You should take it to the free library, where I will probably retrieve it and put it in my personal library. Number three, grading too conservatively. So again, I touched on this. It's like people see a book and like, oh, it's got like a bent corner and like a little bit of wear on the edges. I got to list that as acceptable. Again, customers are not dumb. They understand what a used book is. It needs to be really bad for it to be acceptable. All right, this is a fun part of this video. I got 3 books here. I'm going to ask the question, should it be listed as good condition, acceptable condition, or should it not be sold at all? I'm going to tell you what I think, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. Okay, so first up, we got an awesome book, actually, called Ninja Secrets of Invisibility. It's got these amazing photos of like ninjas doing cool ninja things. So I'm tempted to keep this, but I think it's like an $18 book or something. So is this acceptable condition or not? Now, I'm not sure how much the camera captures this here. The answer is this is a classic example of an acceptable condition book. There's no other blemishes other than heavy cosmetic wear. And again, particularly on the spine, the damage is pretty significant. It's not, the book's intact. So again, it's just purely cosmetic. But I would definitely, this is basically exactly why Amazon created acceptable condition. Exactly for books like this. Heavy cosmetic wear, totally functional in every other way. And so with that, I will sadly part with this book on how to be a super cool sneaky ninja and get $18 for it and list it as acceptable condition and not keep it for my personal collection. Okay, next up, this book. Now, this is a book that I am not going to list for sale at all. And I think it belongs in the free library. It belongs on my shelf, but it does not belong being sold on Amazon. The reason should be evident as I tilt it forward. What do you guys see there? Now, anyone who's sold any amount of books for any amount of time knows what that waviness looks like. That's the wave of death. Okay, that indicates water damage, indicates serious water damage. So I picked this up, scanned it, didn't really look at it too closely, should have, got it home and realized, oh wow, yeah, this book is actually pretty significantly damaged. The pages aren't stuck together, but every other symptom of heavy water damage is here. You can even see like kind of like on the back. It's pretty bad. And should not have bought this book at all. And I'm definitely not going to sell this. A customer would buy this and they're just going to be bummed. So I'm just not going to risk that. Okay. Heavy water damage, always a hard pass. Now this one is kind of interesting. This one will be controversial. This one will raise some eyebrows. This one will have some snitches calling Amazon to report me. But this is, I stand firm on this. Would you list this as good condition or acceptable? Almost everyone would look at this and go, oh, it looks fine to me. I'm going to list this as good. You might be, well, first question is, why would you not list it as good? In fact, it actually looks brand new. Why would I not list this as good? The reason is I went to list this for sale on Amazon, and it turns out this book was actually issued with a dust jacket. If you see the photo on Amazon, it's got completely different art. No dust jacket. According to Amazon's rules, no dust jacket instantly means acceptable condition. So why am I choosing to disregard Amazon's rules? Well, because I have and I can, and because I've done this hundreds, no, definitely thousands of times, never gotten bad feedback for it. Amazon customers are not stupid. They understand if they buy a book in used condition, it may not have a dust jacket. As a matter of fact, hopefully this is obvious, you guys, but you always disclaim any blemishes front and center in your condition notes. Hopefully it goes without saying that everything I've talked about in this video, it's obligatory that you disclose it in the condition notes, right? So I'm just going to disclose no dust jacket right there front and center. People know exactly what the kind of book they're getting. And again, customers aren't dumb and they don't really care about dust jackets that much. So I don't really care what Amazon says. You might be sitting back being like, if I have to choose between what Amazon says and what some doofus in a 70s shirt has to say, I'm going to choose Amazon. I understand why you would make that decision. I personally would not listen to anyone who's wearing a shirt like this myself. But again, I'm a pretty good guinea pig. I'm a pretty good canary in the coal mine. I have done this countless times, never gotten bad feedback for it. As a matter of fact, just recently, I purchased a book on Amazon for myself, and it was in good condition, and I got it in the mail. It's from a mega seller. It arrived with no dust jacket. Was I upset? Absolutely not. They disclosed it. I knew exactly what I was getting. So I'm going to list this in good condition. Amazon says otherwise. Make the decision. Do you trust the doofus in the 70s shirt or Amazon? But again, I've done this so many times. I would have been banned from Amazon 100 million times by now if this invites any more than the slightest risk of trouble with Amazon. Okay, what did we just learn? Number one, it's perfectly fine to list books in acceptable condition. Totally cool. Amazon customers still buy books in acceptable condition. Acceptable condition is the right move for seriously damaged or marked up books. Number four, some books are too damaged to be listed acceptable. Number five, Amazon's condition guidelines are ambiguous. They leave room for interpretation. Number six, a lot of Amazon sellers make the mistake of refusing to sell books in acceptable or grading books as acceptable that should be good condition. Number seven, lots of money is to be made and lost if you get this wrong. That's it, you guys. Don't hesitate to reach out. Peter Valley at FBAmastery.com. Very last thing before we part ways, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video. You can build a whole business off of what I give away for free, and a big part of that is also what's at FBAmastery.com. Link is below this video. You get all these free web classes, everything you see here. If you do not do all these things, I will personally come to your house, rearrange your furniture. None of us want that. So hit the link below this video, head to FBAmastery.com. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.